When we think about Lancia in motorsport, typically what comes to mind is their journey in rally. For decades, Lancia was an integral part of rallying, having won over 10 championships with legendary cars such as the Stratos, the 037, and the Delta. But interestingly, Lancia has also competed in sports car endurance racing, and in fact, they actually raced at the 24 Hours of Le Mans with a high-performance prototype car. So in this video, I'll break down a story that doesn't get told often, which is in regard to the uncommon Lancia Group C Le Mans program. To understand this piece of the brand's history, we need to take a look at Lancia as a company first. Founded on November 27th of 1906 by Vincenzo Lancia and Claudio Fagolin in the famous northern Italian city of Torino, this was a brand that started out small but had big ambitions, and across the years they became known as a company to make great innovations, which included them producing the first ever car with a unibody chassis, which was the Lancia Lambada, first produced in 1922. As I mentioned before, Lancia is most famous for their participation in rally. However, what wasn't as famous was the Italian manufacturer's participation in sports car endurance racing. Before Lancia decided to compete for overall victory at Le Mans with a prototype car though, they actually visited the Circuit de la Sarthe long before that. The brand's first sports car racing appearance was at the 1951 Mille Miglia, where the number 332 Aurelia B20 GT entry finished second overall. And Lancia's first appearance at the 24 Hours of Le Mans came during the same year in 1951, where they brought the same kind of car as in the Mille Miglia, and they finished 12th overall with it. The Italian constructor returned for the next 2 years, and they picked up their best finish at Le Mans in 1952, where they claimed 6th and 8th overall. However, the next event in 1953 didn't go so great, when Lancia brought 3 V6-powered D20s into the 21st edition of the endurance race. But unfortunately, all 3 cars were unable to finish the 1953 event, with the first car suffering electronic issues and the last 2 having engine issues later on in the race. Lancia's next appearance at Le Mans came 23 years later in 1976, when they brought the famous Lancia Stratos HF and finished 20th overall on their return. The Italian brand then made a comeback to Le Mans at the start of the new decade, and finished 19th overall with the Lancia Monte Carlo Turbo in 1980, and finished 8th and 14th overall during the following year in 1981. And alongside that result at Le Mans, Lancia also won the World Sports Car Championship Manufacturers title for cars under 2,000 cc's during that same year in 1981. Now, even though Lancia had been competing at Le Mans over the years, they had not yet brought a car to fight for the outright win at the classic 24-hour endurance race. But that was all about to change during the early 1980s, when the Torino-based constructor planned to enter prototype endurance racing competition. Lancia would therefore build a car that would be under the Group 6 regulations, and they were set to debut the car in 1982, and the entry would be called the Lancia LC1. The LC1 had a unique design, and it used a chassis from the Italian constructor Dallara with a straight 4 Lancia engine, and the entries would be managed by Martini Racing with the iconic red, white, and blue colors featured on the cars. Unfortunately for Lancia though, it was soon announced that the Group 6 regulations would be replaced by the new Group C regulations, but thankfully the LC1s were able to continue to race alongside the new Group C cars, like the Porsche 956 and the Ford C100, which had been recently converted from a Group 6 to a Group C car. And due to the fuel mandates for Group C cars not affecting the Martini Racing entries, the LC1s proved to be quite competitive against the Group C cars. The Lancia LC1 debuted at the 1,000 kilometers of Monza, and during the second round of the 1982 season of the World Sports Car Championship at Silverstone, Lancia got their first overall win with the LC1, and Italian F1 drivers Michele Alboreto and Riccardo Patrese took the win with the number 50 car. After Silverstone, Martini Racing would pick up 2 more wins during the season with the LC1 Group 6 car, and during the 1982 Le Mans, 2 of the Lancia LC1s competed, and they qualified 4th and 5th overall and were only beaten by 3 of the Porsche entries. During the race, the new Lancia prototypes had disastrous starts though, as they were plagued by fuel pump issues and rejoined the field many laps down, while the rivaling Porsche entries continued to lead. Eventually, both of the LC1 entries ended up retiring from the race, with the number 51 Lancia having an engine issue and the number 50 Lancia retiring later on with electrical issues, with around 6 hours to go. Ultimately, Le Mans just wasn't great for Lancia in 1982, with those reliability issues plaguing the team's results, with rivals Porsche also taking the top 3 spots on the overall podium with the 956 entries. But that particular Lancia prototype would soon be replaced, as the Italian constructor would finally introduce their new Group C challenger during the following year. In 1983, the LC1 would be replaced by the new LC2 prototype, which would indeed comply with the new regulations of Group C. The new LC2 Group C car would have an aluminum monocoque chassis, and it would be powered by a 2.6-liter turbocharged V8 engine, built and given by Ferrari, which was derived from the Ferrari 308 GTB. This was also the first Group C car from an Italian manufacturer, and both the bodywork and chassis of the car would be courtesy of Italian designer Gianpaolo Dallara. Like with the previous LC1s, the Lancia LC2s would be entered by Martini Racing, and the cars would make their debut at Monza, where the LC2s would prove to have some significant improvements compared to the LC1s, and the cars would be competitive across the season against the rivaling entries. Speaking of the rivals, if Lancia were to win Le Mans and the title in the World Sports Car Championship, their main competitors would be Porsche, as the German constructor would continue to be successful with their 956 entries. During the 1983 Monza event, Lancia qualified on pole position with a 1 minute 35.860 lap time, which was almost an entire second faster than the second-placed Porsche 956 from Yost Racing. However, qualifying is of course not what defines the race results, and in the event, the Lancia entries encountered issues, with the leading car being taken out of contention for the win due to tire issues, with the second car finishing several laps down, and eventually Yost Racing took the win with the number 11 Porsche. The Lancia LC2's first podium came at the season-ending event in Kyalami, where the number 4 Lancia finished second, thanks to Riccardo Patrese and Alessandro Nannini. And at Le Mans in 1983, Lancia had their best qualifying performance yet with the LC2s, with Martini Racing challenging the Porsche entries and qualifying 2nd, 4th, and 10th overall. In the race itself, Michele Alboreto in the number 4 Lancia dropped down the order on the opening lap, as the factory Porsches led 1 and 2. And even though the Lancia LC2s were more competitive than the previous LC1s, once again, Porsche outperformed Lancia reliability-wise. The first of the 3 LC2s, which was the number 4 car, unfortunately was the first entry to retire, because the car suffered gearbox issues, and even though Alboreto went back out on track following a trip to the pits, the number 4 Lancia eventually succumbed to its issues. And later on, the remaining LC2s retired as well, due to engine issues. And meanwhile, rivals Porsche won again and occupied 9 out of the top 10 positions with the Porsche 956 entries. Talk about domination. And as for the Italian constructor, it was a disappointing event, and the Lancias that did finish were actually the older LC1 entries from the year prior. For 1984, Lancia returned with the LC2, which featured a redesigned suspension, And for the first event of the season at Monza, the Italian manufacturer secured third place with the number 5 Martini Lancia. And for the next race at Silverstone, the team got pole position and eventually finished 4th in the event. At Le Mans that year, Lancia locked out the front row and therefore took pole position at Le Mans for the first time, with the number 4 Lancia's lap being 11 seconds faster than the first of the Porsches. And with the absence of the factory Porsche 956 entries, this would ultimately be Lancia's best chance to win Le Mans overall thus far. During the race, the Lancias showed strong pace and a little bit better reliability compared to 1983 or the year prior in 1982. Ultimately though, later on the number 6 and number 5 Lancias did retire, but the number 5 car did last 20 hours. The one remaining Lancia would finish in 8th to secure the LC2's best finish at Le Mans, but Lancia would still lose out on the win to Porsche in 1984. Later on in the season though, at Kyalami, where the LC2 took its first podium back in 1983, the Lancia cars had a great race. With the absence of the Porsche 956 entries, the Lancia LC2 took its first overall victory in the World Sports Car Championship, with both entries taking 1st and 2nd for Martini Racing, with the number 4 Lancia of Riccardo Patrese and Alessandro Nannini taking the win. In 1985, Lancia entered their 4th year of competition in prototype racing, but the results were unfortunately similar to the year prior. Again, the LC2s proved to be competitive throughout 1985, with a few pole positions achieved throughout the year, which included taking pole in the opening round at Mugello. But they ultimately failed to stay consistently reliable with the Porsches, and during Le Mans that year, even though the Lancias led the race early on, once again they were beaten by the Porsches and encountered reliability issues which hurt their race. But Lancia did in fact beat their previous best result at the classic French endurance race, with the LC2s finishing 6th and 7th in the event. For the following year in 1986, the factory Martini Racing squad planned to just bring one Lancia to the full season grid. The opening event at Monza for the season of the World Sports Car Championship provided drivers Andrea De Cesaris and Alessandro Nannini a second place finish in the number 4 Lancia. However, just like it had happened in years before, the next event in Silverstone in the WSC saw the Lancia LC2's weakness of its reliability issues return, and ultimately the car was forced to retire because of these problems. And with the reliability issues set to continue, and the lack in competitiveness also due to the fact that there were more competitors on the grid, such as the brand new updated Porsche 962, Lancia therefore decided to pull the plug on the factory LC2 program, which meant that they would withdraw from the 1986 edition of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and Martini Racing's factory LC2s wouldn't return for the following rounds, and ultimately Lancia would never return to prototype endurance racing with a factory effort after that. Following the end of their LC2 factory involvement, Lancia would divert their complete motorsport attention to the World Rally Championship, where they would end up finishing 2nd in the manufacturer standings by just 15 points to Peugeot in 1986. Now, even though Lancia had stopped their involvement with the LC2 program, and they would never return with a prototype car again, that didn't mean that the Group C Italian entry would stop racing in motorsports, as customer teams would continue to enter the Lancia in further rounds of racing. However, the teams that entered the privateer LC2s were unsuccessful for the majority of the races that they competed in. Racer Gianni Massato continued to race a Lancia LC2 in the further endurance races. Then Italian team Dolop Racing entered that same Lancia badged as the number 24 car into the 1988 edition of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and lasted a total of 21 hours before the car unfortunately retired. Massato returned to enter the car in the 1989 race, but the car ended up not racing in the event, and ultimately, combined with the factory Lancia program no longer supporting the entries, And the rising competition in Group C from more brands like Jaguar, Mercedes, and Nissan, for example, taking the fight to Porsche, this ultimately meant that the idea of Lancia cars and prototype endurance racing was inevitably coming to a close. The last time the Lancia LC2 competed in a race was in 1991, when the Veneto-equipped team raced the very track where the LC2 story began at Monza. Unfortunately though, the number 15 Lancia retired from the event with just 12 laps completed. Ultimately, Lancia never won the 24 Hours of Le Mans or stood on the famous French podium during their time in sports car endurance racing, but they did achieve some success at Le Mans, with the highlight being the 1984 event, where they took pole and therefore secured first and second in qualifying. To this day, Lancia's best result was finishing 6th on 2 separate occasions, first in 1952 and more recently in 1985, when the LC2 Group C prototypes got their best result at the Circuit de la Sarthe, finishing 6th and 7th overall. During their time in prototype racing in general, with the LC1 and the later Group C variant of the LC2, Lancia did secure 4 overall wins in the World Sports Car Championship, and well over 10 podiums. Many famous drivers also got an opportunity to compete in Lancia's prototypes over the years, including racers like Riccardo Patrese, Michele Alboreto, Bob Wallach, Henri Pescarolo, Alessandro Nannini, Teo Fabi, and Andrea De Cesaris, to name a few. The facts are true though that Lancia's Group C program wasn't as famous compared to other manufacturers' car programs over the years, from brands like Porsche, Mazda, Jaguar, Sauber Mercedes, and so on. But ultimately, Lancia's program was still something very special, and the Italian brand's story is still one to remember and marvel at. So that was the breakdown of Lancia's time at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, as along with their successful rally program, as I explained, the Italian manufacturer did indeed compete in prototype endurance racing, mainly during the 1980s. So what did you think about the Lancia LC2 Group C car, and all the other entries from the iconic brand that competed at Le Mans? Well, feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like sports car endurance racing, this might be the channel for you. I'm making content on the WEC, IMSA, and so on every single week. In fact, there are some videos out on your screen all about these topics. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.